Hey guys, Matt Gurney here, Jen Gerson with me. The last episode of the Line podcast for 2023, where we mainly look at each other and go, wow, that year was weird. All that and a little bit more on this latest episode of the Line podcast. What do you want to talk about?
I think we got to start with the UN.
Do we?
I'm afraid
you're right.
No choice. We have no choice in this matter. Our will has been taken from us, screaming from our mouths. So this week, the UN held a non-binding resolution at the General Assembly that essentially called for a ceasefire. There has been much noise, little sound on the subject. Essentially, the motion itself, I don't think it's wrong to say that it was not exactly pro-Israel here. There wasn't much talk about. I'll pull up the actual motion, but essentially,
it's anti-Israel.
It's anti-Israel. Yeah, it takes a team here. This is not like we're calling for a two-sided peace. This is very much a Israel stop bombing Gaza. Despite the fact that as we know, there are still several hundred hostages in Gaza. There doesn't really seem to be much onus on Hamas to lay down its arms here. And this, I guess,
if you read the text of the motion, Jen, it basically, you would have no idea that Israel did not just wake up one day and decide to go flatten Gaza.
Yeah, essentially.
The motion is look what the Jews are doing to Gaza.
For a group that consistently calls for context, there's a notable lack thereof in this motion. So that's fine. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about the UN politics and UN motions, because bluntly, the only thing that is important for our sake is what this is signaling domestically. Frankly, a non-binding UN motion for a ceasefire is completely meaningless. It's not going to force Israel's hand. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to change the metrics on the ground for Israel. It's an entirely predictable kind of answer, especially from Anglo countries that have nothing to lose by demanding it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy for Australia or New Zealand or Canada to call for a ceasefire because we will never actually have to deal with the consequences of that ceasefire. We're not on the ground. None of this affects us really in any way.
That's like the countries that declared war on Germany in like February of 1945.
Sure.
Just like, well, yeah, we see we declare war too. We're part of the Allies. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Sure. And the other thing too is it's the other observation that I would make about it is it's not. Canada itself knows that this is kind of bullshit, that this is a bit of a steam blowing off exercise. And you can tell that by Bob Rae, who got caught on a hot mic basically after he issued his vote, was like, well, we'll see how that goes down. I mean,
laughed.
Canada remains committed to the goal of a comprehensive, a just, and a lasting peace in the Middle East, including the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with the state of Israel. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give a floor to distinguished representative of Iceland.
See how that flies?
He laughed. I mean, this is like I said, the UN has a couple of roles to play in geopolitics. One of the most obvious one is that it's a really good place for nations, and particularly Arab nations, to blow off steam about Israel. I think I counted. There have been something like 80 resolutions at the General Assembly with regards to Israel, and I think 226 resolutions at the Security Council with regards to Israel. This is, at this point, the geopolitical equivalent of showing up in colors for your favorite sports team because fighting over who did what on the football field keeps us all from killing each other, smashing our heads against the ground, and feasting upon the gooey brains of our enemies.
Yeah, go Leafs, go.
That's, to that end, I have no particular issue with the UN as emotional management exercise and probably thinks it does some good in this regard. And if, hey, I know there's a lot of deeply felt feelings about Palestine out there, and there's a lot of anger. And if channeling that rage into a UN vote makes you feel accomplished, like you're getting something done, you're getting movement, you're being heard, that's positive. Like, I mean, like that's a positive end. Okay. But at the same time, I also am able to see a UN vote of this nature for exactly what it is. That's all it is. Matt, why do you think Canada voted in favor of the ceasefire with this motion?
Two reasons. One of
Okay.
them is a direct follow-on to what you were just saying there. You're describing it as emotions management. I would describe it a little bit different. The UN, which we started after the Second World War with such lofty aspirations, has morphed into a way that countries of all different kinds, very much including the Western democracies, it is a safe space to signal.
Yeah, that's right.
And when there's something you need to comment on, but you don't really want to do anything about, you can raise it at the UN.
Mhm.
And you do it knowing full well you get the value of having raised it at the UN, but it doesn't cost anything, doesn't do anything. Like, it doesn't actually require you to think or do or mean anything. So the UN's a safe space to virtue signal. The other comment that I would actually make, though, and I think it's very much it's not a direct answer to your question about the UN, but it's my analysis of what the situation that the Liberals are in. They had this is what happens, because I want to add a bit of context in it. It's not just that we voted for the motion at the UN.
Mhm.
It was that hours before, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had released that joint statement you referred to,
Mhm.
and I thought the joint statement was fine.
Mhm.
Like, I probably disagree with it, but I think it was fine. It was calling for a ceasefire and a sustainable peace with conditions. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
another way that you could phrase the Australian, Canadian, New Zealander statement was a call for Hamas's surrender.
Sure.
And okay. And then after the UN vote, Melanie Joly came out and gave a statement, and she used the word ceasefire repeatedly, but she also referred to the things that were in the original statement, but not in the UN resolution.
Right.
So what we have,
And after the UN resolution, there was also a Melanie Joly tweet that was just like, well, our idea of a ceasefire. So like, she's reframing the concept of a ceasefire so that it can mean whatever she wants it to mean according to the audience that she's speaking to.
bingo.
Yeah.
So within a day, a matter of hours, we had a call effectively for a conditional ceasefire premised on the surrender of Hamas and the release of the hostages. We had a UN vote that was none of those things. It was just an Israel bash. We had a Melanie Joly tweet that basically exists in a world where words don't mean things. And then we had a Melanie Joly press conference where she was trying to portray the UN vote effectively as if it were an extension of the Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand statement. Well, having called for a conditional ceasefire, we of course felt moved to vote for the unconditional. It doesn't make any fucking sense. But what it all, to me, when you look at all four of these things and you combine them, this is what happens when your foreign policy has no principle and it has nothing but electoral calculation.
Well, and this gets the electoral calculation. There are a lot of people, and even Rika Welsh from the Globe, God bless her, asked Julie directly, is the reason why you're voting for this ceasefire, which is a departure from Canadian norms, the fact that you're just afraid to piss off Muslim voters and donors, of whom there are significant numbers in Canada. Muslims wildly outnumber Canada. I think the latest number for Muslims in Canada is what?
Jews. No number of Jews in Canada.
Outnumber Jews in Canada. I apologize. What's the number? Is it's 1.4 million? How many?
I don't remember offhand, but it ain't close.
It's it's actually 1.775 million in Canada. About 1 million of them are in Ontario. This is according to Wikipedia. So of course, right in the very 905 ridings that the Liberals will need to hold on to in the next election should they hope to survive. And then let's compare that. How many Jewish people? Canada, 400,000. So, well, it was more than you thought. But I mean, the number,
Yeah, I can
Look,
I
you're
can do
gonna-
the math.
the disparity is what it is. So I am not even sure that I'm quite that cynical.
Well, I am. No, this is
Are you that cynical? I'm
Oh,
not
no.
sure I share that cynicism.
Oh,
I actually
when
suspect that this is more, I'm trying to please multiple different types of progressives who are all over the map on this in my base. And I'm trying to weave or thread an impossible needle. And I'm doing it by just sort of saying, I believe in a ceasefire. But then when I get challenged by a more pro-Israel side of this conversation, I'm a ceasefire with conditions. But then when I'm in front of my more activist base, of course, we voted for the ceasefire.
without conditions.
This is very quintessential politics talking out of both sides of their mouths, depending on whom they're talking to. But I don't necessarily think that it is so ruthlessly predicated solely on there are more Muslims than Jews in this country. Because also
understand.
the Muslims aren't necessarily a monolith on this issue either, and it would be wrong to presume they are.
Well, they're definitely not.
No,
Talk to some of them. They definitely are not.
there's a wide range of views on this in the Muslim community.
Many Canadian Muslims are here for a reason. They didn't want to live in the Middle East anymore. The idea that they've just imported the problems of the Middle East whole cloth ain't true if you know any of them. I think there's common ground. We'll use that expression that kind of links my position on this to yours. I think it starts from a place of having no actual principle on
That's
this
right. Yes.
on this issue, where you're viewing everything through the lens of what will get us in the least amount of trouble. It's no part of this is taking a brave stand in defense of a potentially unpopular position. And I've made this point before. I feel bad for the Liberals on this one. The Conservatives, they're safe being pro-Israel resolutely. The NDP, they're safe being resolutely pro-Palestinian and calling for a ceasefire here. And those are both ethically valid, logically coherent positions to have.
We at the Line can tolerate a pretty wide view of positions on Israel Palestine.
I know what mine are, but I can look at someone else and go, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but exactly. Like I know what mine are, but I can look at someone else and be like, I think you're wrong, and here's why. But I don't think that you're a bad person for holding that view.
I wouldn't even bother explaining why. I would just smile.
Well,
that's
enough.
great.
But I'm saying
that's great. But the Liberals, the fault line goes right through them.
That's right.
And they're all over the place. They have no room for principle. I'm not sure they have principles, even if they had room for them. I don't know if they have any. So what they're left with is a series of constantly evolving nothing statements to try and cover off every base here.
Yeah.
And here's where I do get cynical. The electoral math will inevitably pull them in one direction. Yes. So even if it starts as an almost amoral maneuvering, trying to figure out a position that they can cover that will be either maximally politically beneficial or at least minimally politically harmful, the gravity, like in the absence of conviction of Israel's right to defend itself as a democracy. And I'm not asking anybody to hold that view, but I'm saying if that is not the view you hold, the electoral math of this will eventually pull you to the Palestinian side, because that's where the votes are.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but what I think they're miscalculating here is that the weird shifting tone deaf back and forthness will hurt them with both sides. Because I think that if you're pro-Palestinian and you're seeing what Israel is doing as a genocide, seeing the flip-floppy back and forth mealy-mouthed response by the Liberals is not going to appease you. And same side with Team Israel. Like if you're looking at this being like you're appeasing the terrorists, you're not seeing someone who's trying to give you a reasonable compromise. You're seeing someone who's siding with evil, right? Like the two positions on this are radically polarized, and there isn't a lot of room for lunatics like us who actually try and maybe fail, but try to have a balanced understanding of both perspectives on this. People are falling really hard on one line and the other, and by being mealy-mouthed on this, I think the Liberals just wind up alienating literally everyone.
No matter what,
because I mean, even rather relatively measured people like us aren't impressed by this.
Well, two comments to that. First of all, even no matter what side of this issue you're on, you have ample evidence that the other guy wants to kill your kids. That's hard hard to build bridges in that environment.
Mhm.
The other comment I would make is that I've often said of these liberals, and it's not just the liberals, most other governments would be similar in a similar situation, but this is an optics first government. This is also a government that, more to the point, their initial response to almost every issue is not how to deal with the issue, it's how to spin the issue.
Mhm.
And I think that reflects who's left
Yep.
in the PMO versus who's
Mhm.
departed the PMO.
Mhm.
And I think some of the worst mistakes this government has made is when they have either failed to realize or have taken too long to realize that actually this isn't a communications problem. This is like an actual tangible reality problem.
And they don't start
And
from first principles in managing that problem.
bingo, because, well, or because their first principle is comms.
Their first principle is
Yeah.
comms, but you should start from a position of, okay, what actually is our stance on this
We don't have any.
conflict?
We have comms.
Yeah.
And I
why do
think
we believe that? And what are our convictions on that stance? And then build your comm strategy out from that conviction.
Mhm.
You don't build a conviction back from a comm strategy.
Sure
And
we
that's
do.
what they're doing.
Yeah,
It sucks.
we absolutely
Comm
do
strategy.
that.
Yes.
And I think, I'm going to go, look, again, this is me picking on the liberals here, but Harper and his guys were similar because what we've been living now for a while, 8 years of Trudeau, almost 10 years of Harper, about 18 years, we've been living in the micro segmented era of politics. And most of the time you can get away with it. Most of the time, the governments don't really run any particular risk taking a stand for or against a micro-segmented issue because it's micro-segment. Like, okay, so we only 4,000 people in 6 ridings care about this, so we're going to say something to them, and the other overwhelming percentage of the Canadian population is not going to pay any attention. They don't care, but we're going to win those 6,000 people. This is an issue you can't micro-segment. And I think they're trying, right? Which is why, well, hey, we put out a statement with our allies today calling for the hostages to be released. And then that record scratching noise. Oh, hey, we voted at the UN for an unconditional ceasefire. Back to Melanie Joly going, hey, well, what does ceasefire even mean anyway? And then back to a different Melanie Joly tweet saying, we Stanley oppose. The reflex for narrow, micro-targeted communications remains, even on an issue of such broad and existential interest that everybody is hanging on every goddamn word you say about it.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And you just end up looking like an idiot.
Speaking of micro-targeting, like and subscribe to the line, I think that we should talk about what the fuck the Conservatives are doing on the Ukraine stuff. Can you explain this to me? Because I'm at a loss.
No,
I either think that the Conservatives have just totally internally screwed up on this. So just look at the Conservatives, I think, again, voted against a free trade bill with Ukraine, citing some nonsense sort of carbon tax language in it.
Yep.
Right? I think they doubled down like that on that again this week, although I'd need to get the specifics on
and
it.
Combined, they've been voting against everything. Just they're voting they're voting down or trying to every government motion and bill.
Right. They're trying to coat every motion and bill, and yet one of the motions and bills they have shut down has been the Ukraine Free Trade Act, which of course has allowed a lot of liberals to seize on the Conservatives for falling in line with weird right pro-Putin propaganda is the clear insinuation of this. And I can tell you, being out in Alberta, a lot of Ukrainians are very pissed at the Conservatives right now for doing this. So they're playing games with free trade bills, and just it comes off as incredibly petulant. But also, I'm not sure that it's clear what the motivation of this is. There are some people who have gone full on. They're trying to appease the base within their wing that is pro-Ukraine and is perfectly happy to let Ukraine cleave Ukraine from the herd and let it leave it to pasture to die. Pro-Russia, exactly. And there are people, I think, who are a little bit more. This really sounds more like a cock up, like maybe they just didn't think the implications of trying to vote everything down, and this has just been weaponized. And then there are some people who I think who are a bit more. You guys are letting your fixation with the carbon tax go to your heads, and you're not thinking big picture. Yeah. And then there are a lot of people I think who are just observing that rightly, that as much as we criticize the Liberals for having no coherent or cogent foreign policy outlook. Neither do the conservatives, and this is utterly amplified in what they're doing right now with this free trade Ukraine stuff. So, Matt, I don't know what's happening. I'm confused.
Well, let me tell. I mean, I'll weigh in on what you said there, but let me just tell you quite literally what is happening. Poor Michael Chong is, like, for the third week in a row trying to tweet his way out of this, where every day there's some new Michael Chong tweet explaining why the conservatives actually really fucking love Ukraine and Ukrainians. But you see, you have to understand, if you knew why we'd really done the things we'd done, part 438,291 in an ongoing series of tweets from Michael Chong trying to explain. If you're sending out Michael Chong week after week after week to explain what you're doing, you fucked up. And we can talk about why the fuck up happened, but I think we need to start the conversation with the conservatives fucked up. And
But did
then
they purposely fuck up, or did they accidentally fuck up?
Yeah, you gave three scenarios. One of them is that this is a deliberate nudge, wink, wink at the pro Putin faction of the far right, which has a presence in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that it was a failure to think through how monolithic opposition would play on specific issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is going sight blind a bit, I think, on carbon tax stuff.
Sure. Okay. I think you summarized my positions up much better than I did, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm an editor. I think it's a combination of 2 and 3,
okay.
But I think it's going to feed back into 1, because my sense of what happened here is that the conservatives are not thinking anything through these days. I was saying a minute ago, the government views everything through a comms lens. I think the conservatives view everything through an attack lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they got themselves into trouble on this one. I think so I start with your second suggestion that this is just sort of a monolithic opposition approach.
Right, because they're part of engaging in a strategy to try and roll through the House processes to keep the House going over Christmas. So they're just opposing
which
everything.
Totally failed. Everybody's gone home now. But
that's right. Which everybody knew it would.
Because they weren't organized enough to actually do what they were trying to do.
But they were just then going item by item by item by item and opposing it without stopping to think, geez, maybe this free trade with Ukraine bill is one we don't want to be seen to be
or
opposing.
The Canadian military training mission for Ukrainian forces. And then also on top of that, so I think that was the first failure. And there might have been an opportunity for an adult in the room to settle things down. Well, first of all, assuming there were adults in the room, which is not an assumption I grant the Conservative Party by default these days. But second, carbon tax was right in front of them, and it's like red to a bull, right?
Yeah,
like,
they couldn't.
So they just went for it. But I do not discount entirely the first thing you mentioned, which is that there are pro-Putin, pro-Russian elements of the far right. I don't think that is driving the party, but I guarantee you there's going to be a few MPs who are going to send out stupid Facebook posts.
100%. I mean, but here's the thing: is that, like, how many pro-Putin far right people in the base are there compared to angry Ukrainian farmers in the base? And who's going to win that war? I think my money on the Ukrainian farmers.
Oh, I think they'll win the vote, but who's going to win the noisy social media war? To an extent that I don't think people understand, and we should never allow ourselves to forget. 20 bots on Facebook can scare the shit out of your typical MP.
That's true. I mean, we are also seeing, like, farmer Ukrainian diaspora or people in rural communities in Alberta, conservatives having to walk back a lot of these votes and try to explain to their largely Ukrainian diaspora constituents, no. So, like, I actually just think that if you're going to weigh the influence of the pro-Putin far right versus the influence of angry Slavic farmers, I think the angry Slavic farmers are going to have it.
I think so too, but
I think they're going to have it every time.
No, I think so too, but I do think there's going to be some idiot, maybe a handful of idiots in the Conservative caucus who are going to put up a Facebook
watched too much
post.
Tucker Carlson and got into politics because they wanted to fight the good fight. Yes, I just think that, as I said, no party is a monolith, and certainly not the Conservative Party is a monolith. So I have a hard time saying that this is motivated by some sort of alt-right impulse, just because there are so many different pulls of power within the party, and I just don't think that quite adds up for me. I just don't think the math adds up for me.
The only thing I would say, Jen, I think you and I are more or less on the same page here, but let me just make one observation I've made about these guys. The current conservatives, they don't want any danger to them on their right flank, basically meaning the PPC. And I don't think there is any, really.
No,
like
not
in a
really.
pragmatic sense,
There isn't.
if Pierre Poilievre is stampeding towards an election win 6, 12, 24 months from now, whatever it happens to be, the PPC voters are going to see that, and they're going to hold their noses. They're going to get on that train. So I don't think this is an electoral problem. I think it's a personality problem. I think there are people within the Conservative Party leadership who have personal animosity to some of the PPC guys, and they are going to keep the boot on their necks right through. And that might lead to them making stupid decisions. But given a choice, I really believe this. Poilievre's people, given a choice between picking up 10 more ridings in moderate parts of the country by being sane, or screwing Maxime Bernier out of one seat, they'll do that. And I think they're motivated out of spite, not electoral calculation.
I will withhold my judgment on that position until I see more.
Aren't you being cautious?
I'm always cautious. No, that's a lie.
Lie.
I'm definitely
and
not always
subscribe.
cautious. Like and subscribe. Okay, we want to talk really, really briefly about the Canadaland stuff. I don't want to make this a major issue because bluntly, it isn't.
You got to explain that.
It's the absolute epitome of internal bubble gossip, bubble tea in Canadian media politics circles. So we kind of have to talk about it, but I have to talk about it with the incredible assumption that 90% of our listeners are going to have no idea what in the hell I'm talking about. Okay.
And at least 50% of the line editors wishes he didn't know what you were talking about.
Exactly. So let's start by explaining what Canadaland is. Matt, how do we explain Canadaland to a listener of the line?
Toronto-based independent media website, publishes written content and a series of podcasts. Similar, I would say, in function and form to the line. Older than us, more established, bigger. And this is the important part, and I don't mean to say this unfairly, but I would say skews to the left.
Yes. I would also put a caveat in here that I've known the founder, the publisher of Canadaland, Jesse Brown, for years and years and years now. I did a podcast on the line called Oppo with Justin Ling, which was actually a pretty popular and pretty fun podcast. But it was
fun. I used to listen to
it was a super fun podcast. But the Canadaland's general audience hated it and hated me with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns, which was also really funny.
You bring out the best in people.
I always do. It's a gift. It's a gift, Matt. Anyway, so I have how should I say this? Complicated feelings toward the whole experience. I have personal affection for Jesse Brown. I have complicated feelings for the outlet that he's built, but I operate from a position of goodwill toward fellow independent. Go on, ye Christian soldier. An independent media company that can build and sustain a business is a good thing for Canadian journalism and for Canadians. Great. So I don't want to sit here and be shitty to other independent media, right?
You know what,
necessarily.
Jen, can you pause just for 1 second? We should probably mention, as part of our explaining Canadaland to people who don't know about it, a big part of the original mission of Canadaland and Jesse Brown was independent media criticism.
Okay, yeah. So we should probably also start by also explaining that part of the reason why Canadaland took off as it did was because it started out as a place for independent media criticism. Now it's branched out pretty wildly beyond there. And I think also one of the issues Canadaland has dealt with has been mission and focus creep. Mission creep. Yep. Right now they're doing podcasts about all kinds of things, about politics, about Thunder Bay, about, Indigenous issues, about blah, blah, blah. It's definitely gone beyond media criticism, and the amount of media criticism they actually do now is pretty minimal, but it's still there. So, and also Jesse Brown has had a complicated history and relationship with many of his employees. There have been many people who are coming from more marginalized backgrounds who are very disillusioned with Canadaland. They felt like you're creating a media outlet that was meant to highlight and platform voices who we don't normally hear in Canadian media. and then who would often find themselves disillusioned by the way Jesse Brown personally ran his business or by some of the editorial decisions that Jesse Brown made. And like, there's a long history here and a lot of backstory here. And so as a result, most of us who are a little bit more on the conservative side, even on the independent media, are kind of content to just sit back and watch the drama play out. Every once in a while, there's a periodic Jesse Brown hate-on drama. Every once in a while, like an internal report from Canadaland comes out and everybody shits on Jesse Brown. And this has kind of become a semi-annual show in Canadian media if you watch it. And as a result, I don't make much of an issue of it or pay that much attention to it from year to year. I left Canadaland, I left Jesse in good standing, and I went out and did my own thing.
Should I mention, you've declared your conflict here. I'll just say I have been a paid guest on Canadaland podcasts.
Sure.
I've known Jesse for years. We don't have a personal relationship, but he's always been professional when our dealings, pleasant to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like we're not buddies. I wish him no harm. Like I will say I respect how he has built Canadaland. I hope the line one day could be as large and successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a model. That being said, I also don't have any personal grudges with him in terms of how he managed me when I was working at Oppo. He was actually very hands-off. Oppo had our podcast had its own production team and its own reporting structure. Jesse really wasn't involved in it, or very rarely involved in it at all. So he was always very hands-off with us. Anyway, so all of that caveating, all of that foreknowledge, you go into understanding this particular conflict. Jesse, I say Canadaland has also developed a bit of a reputation for being kind of nasty online. It and its followers have a tendency to attack its critics in really bad faith, mean-spirited ways that were, for a lot of people, emblematic of the worst and most liberal instincts of wokeism writ large.
The Canadalanders are their own phenomena.
Canadalanders are their own phenomenon, exactly. Yep. And he's kind of built an audience and a business model that I think's fallen into the audience capture trap.
Yep.
And both you and I here at the line are conscious of the audience capture trap, and we try really hard to stay out of it. But eventually we'll probably drive our way into that ditch too. And
this is why every couple of weeks I publicly execute a commenter in front of everyone else.
I mean, look, the audience capture trap basically means that when you are largely reader and subscriber funded, the temptation is to produce play the hits to provide more and more content that appeals to that base, because that's how your incentive structures are aligned. And the problem with that is that can get you into some really, really dark rabbit holes very, very fast as you follow more.
All of a sudden, if you don't feed the base, you're bankrupt.
That's exactly right.
You want to do something else, or you want to take a contrary position, and you have curated your own supporters to the point where they don't want that. That's
exactly right. And I think Jesse's definitely fallen into the audience capture trap, and this became unavoidable when, after the Hamas attacks, Jesse started to, from my perspective, very factually and very neutrally describe the anti-Semitism that he was seeing and experiencing in his community in Toronto and Montreal in particularly. It also should be noted that Jesse Brown is Jewish, and this is well known. Part of that observation, he was pointing out like synagogues that had been firebombed, and pointing out, the Heather Reisman posters that, a bunch of academics of all people have been now charged with putting up. I won't get into the details, but one of the things that he did, for example, was highlight a tweet by the Toronto Star internal ombudsman, Shri Paradkar, who had made several tweets and several follow-up tweets that really controversial, and also questioned the validity of much of what was being claimed about October 7th. Mm-hmm. It wasn't full on the Jews are lying, but it was very much we don't really know what happened on October 7th. And it was like, you do.
Oh, don't we?
Don't we? And I think that there were many people, not just Jesse, but there were many people who said it's not. I mean, Shri Paradkar is within her rights as a columnist to publish whatever the hell she wants, but she had this weird hybrid role where she was not only a columnist, but she was an internal ombudsman whom minorities within the newsroom were supposed to go to relate their independent concerns about bias in coverage, discrimination in the workplace, all of these sorts of issues. And there were many people who very reasonably pointed out that to have an internal ombudsman be out on Twitter doing October 7th denialism undermined their capacity to be seen as a fair and neutral voice on behalf of potentially their Jewish colleagues and even their Palestinian ones or their Muslim ones. Mm-hmm. And by all means, Shri, continue to write your column, say whatever you want. But that position is not compatible with the managerial role that had been carved out. And so what happened was, and again, this is internal tea of internal tea here, is that eventually someone got to the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Star and made this argument. Anne-Marie Owens, whom of course you and I both know, Amo seems to have thought that argument was compelling, and Shri was removed from her managerial role, and instead
the role was abolished.
The role was abolished, and instead it was kind of ported over to the union side. Mm-hmm. So now she's going to be serving in a kind of similar role on the union position in this. To my mind, that's actually a good compromise. Like you're right, that role probably shouldn't exist as a managerial role. It probably is more appropriate as a union role. And now whether or not her actions and positions make her fit for that role on the union side can be dealt internally by the union. Right?
I think fundamentally the type of person and the type of personality who's suited to be a newspaper columnist is almost 180 degrees off the kind of personality you want in any kind of internal ombudsperson role.
That's right. Yes, exactly. These are not.
They're wildly incompatible.
Incompatible. As a newspaper columnist, you're supposed to have a strong opinion on the world. As an internal ombudsman,
have an extremely open mind.
Yeah. You actually have to have the opposite personality trait. You need to have a very open mind and be very sort of pragmatic and fair-minded about things. And I think that putting her in that role was always a reflection to the height of the moral panics of 2020. Mm-hmm. And with a few years, I think it's pretty easy to see that there's an internal contradiction here that we were asking her to serve that wasn't actually fair on her. So anyway, Jesse Brown writes a story about this under his own byline, explaining, again, going back to his roots as a bit of a media critic. He gets a copy of the internal memo by Amo explaining this move by Shri, and he writes a piece about it. Anybody who isn't extremely invested in a narrative, I think, could read the piece as being well-researched, neutral in its tone, and fair in describing what is happening to Shri. His staff did not see it that way. Many people in the Canadaland sphere seem to think that there was a kind of a Jewish conspiracy between Jesse and his cousin, and maybe John Kay, who knows, to oust Shri, a woman of color, from an important internal position. I think that interpretation is nuts, but okay. This all comes to a head, what was it, on Thursday night? Thursday night,
I think.
When the staff of the unionized and a few non-unionized staff of Canadaland issue this anonymous statement where they basically say, I don't know, I think Robin Urbach more or less summed it up in a rather beautiful tweet. So I'm just going to quote her tweet right here, if you don't mind. This is a summation, a paragraph. Ahem, in the voice of Robin. Our Jewish boss is speaking out against anti-Semitism in the wrong way. He has published misleading and targeted statements, and no, we won't elaborate or explain. Regards, Canadaland staff.
That's so just what Robin sounds like. Yeah.
That's exactly
Sat
right.
next to her for years. That's exactly what she sounds like.
I hope Robin will not be offended in any way. So, look, a couple problems with this. And I would come at this by saying, I actually think that there's a really wide range of positions on Israel and Palestine that a sensible person can sensibly hold. I totally get that. But if your position is that Jesse Brown talking in a fairly factual way about the anti-Semitism affecting his community is some kind of inappropriate attack, or how should I say this, inappropriate or irresponsible approach to dealing with the reality around us, I think you're off your goddamn rocker. I think by saying stuff like that, you are implicitly admitting that you think firebombing synagogues and targeting Toronto Jews is a legitimate act of Palestinian resistance. And that means I think you have blurred the line between legitimate resistance and protest and anti-Semitism. And I think that for a staff to come out as they have and say, well, Jesse's been irresponsible. Irresponsible how? He's offered misleading statements about Shree. What statements? Which statements have been misleading? They've said in this memo, we think that his actions have degraded trust with our audience. What audience exactly?
Why, how, and who?
Why, how, and who? Really spell this out for me. Let's be explicit. What audience has been undermined or has lost trust in Canadaland because Jesse Brown factually reported on anti-Semitism in the community? Please lay it out. Use short words, but they don't do that. They don't do any of that. Instead, there's just a lot of snowflake nonsensory about we are committed to pursuing rigorous journalism. You are, that's fine, but you can't tolerate the journalism of your boss. The statement is incredibly weak. I think bluntly, it's intellectually and it's morally weak. I think if you look at the statement in context, the clear implication is that the staff of Canadaland are really resenting their Jew boss making statements about anti-Semitism in a moment when most of them are united in the assumption that the Jews are committing genocide in Gaza and everybody needs to be on side. I think that this, to me, I read as a statement of a staff that doesn't like its friends getting mad at them on the internet, on Twitter, because of their Jew boss's statements on anti-Semitism. I think this is a staff that hasn't actually thought very hard through the implications of what they're condemning. And I think that this is a boss that is hiding behind union processes in the most facile way to try and take pot shots at their employer because they don't actually have the balls to put their names to what they really believe. I have nothing but contempt for this. I think these people are risible. I think they're losers. And I have no patience or time for any of these absolute gormless, spineless pieces of shit. If you want to go out and you want to say Canadaland should be a pro-Palestinian, rah news agency, and you want to make that case, make that fucking case. Put your name on it. Come right out. If you want to come out and say Jesse Brown shouldn't be talking about anti-Semitism because it makes us look bad, have the courage of your fucking convictions. Come out and say that. But don't sit around and hide behind an anonymous statement shitting on your boss for his actions without having the courage to explicitly lay out what your problem is and put your name on what you think he should be doing instead. You're wasting my time and you're just demonstrating what absolute fucking losers you are. You weak-headed Muppets. That's all I have to say about that.
Tell me how you really feel. It's time to get down off that fence, Jen.
Like there are a lot of people in my comments who are just like, this is how unions operate, and I'm like, no,
it's not.
We're not talking about pay equity. We're not talking about internal working conditions.
Yeah, I know.
We're not talking about legitimate grievances. That would all be legitimate grounds for their union to be issues. No, they're trying to hide behind union processes to bully their Jew boss into shutting up. That's what's happening here. Fuck off.
Fundamentally, I agree. The union has every right. In fact, it has a duty to speak out in defense of the membership, either individual members or the membership collectively, and even perhaps as they did with some non-union members having signed this. There's nothing inappropriate whatsoever with the union speaking out on workplace issues.
If Jesse's bullying
wages,
staff, go to town on him. No issues.
Wages, benefits, workplace
Absolutely.
safety, cultural environment, things like that. The
Absolutely.
fundamental complaints raised in this letter are of an editorial nature.
Yeah, that's
and
correct.
They should be addressed through editorial processes. And
Correct.
I'm not asking anyone to do anything in that letter that I do not do on almost every fucking single thing I've ever written in my life, which is put my name to it.
Put your name to it.
And
you don't get credit for virtue if you're not willing to demonstrate conviction.
Yeah. You know what? You to be honest, you feel much more strongly about this than I do. At least I think I agree with you intellectually, but I don't have nearly your depth of feeling on this. I know I already said already that I wish Jesse Brown no harm. And Jesse, if you're listening to this, I want you to know I don't mean this in any way as a personal swipe against you. This is a problem Jesse has made for himself, and that only Jesse can solve.
That's correct. That's also correct.
Yeah, this is like, I think Jesse, again, I say this as someone who's very much an admirer of the success of Canadaland. Jesse identified correctly many, many years ago. Canadaland's not new. They've been around for a while. They were arguably
more than 10 years now, I think.
Someone will I think, didn't they recently have a 10-year anniversary?
Yeah, yep.
So we'll call it 10 years. And I think Jesse identified intelligently and correctly two boxes that Canadaland could tick. Generally speaking, left of center. Also, anti-institutional. We were the proud, independent guys who were going to tell the truth about the big, bad legacy media. And now, to your point, there's been some mission creep away from this. But Jesse has spent a decade cultivating a left-wing audience that doesn't like institutions. And now he finds himself, by either personal circumstance or religious conviction or political conviction, being on the right, meaning politically right side of an issue, where he is seen, correctly or otherwise, as defending a powerful modern military and powerful, influential, in some cases, institutions and members of society. The audience that he has cultivated was always going to react badly to this. The staff he has built to serve his cultivated audience was obviously always going to react badly to this. This is a problem Jesse has made for himself. And, you know, I very much believe this is a road to hell, good intentions situation. But ultimately, you can go argue with people on Twitter as much as you want. By the way, I would ask you to stop.
But I was having so much fun.
When I see you arguing on Twitter, it's like how I feel when a particular buddy of mine says, I think I'll have one more drink. Because I have carried him home. I've literally carried him home, and we do not always make it with all of his shoes. But I think...
But I did have a great night, Matt.
Oh, yeah. No, we a lot of laughs, some great memories. Jesse has put himself in this situation. Frankly, I'm sympathetic to where he is, because I agree with his position on the issues here. But I think this is going to get to the point where either for him or the staff and supporters of Canadaland, this will not be tenable. And look, Jesse should either exit or he should clean house.
I don't. You look at this, and look at this now from a managerial perspective. This letter demonstrates to me that fundamentally the editorial relationship has been broken between the owner and the employees.
Publisher. I don't know if he owns
Publisher,
it.
sorry.
I don't know the business structure of Canadaland.
Sure. Let's. I don't know exactly what the business structure of Canadaland, and I just don't think it's relevant for the point. You issue a statement like this by your employees. I mean, your employees are telling you very clearly who and what they are and what they value, and it ain't you. And yes, I think you're right. I think that breaks the fundamental relationship between leadership and employee. I don't think that in a non-trust environment like that, you can have a functional working relationship. And bluntly, if these people want to have some, I think their position is wrong. But more than that, I think what I find so contemptible about it is that it's cowardly. If you really feel this way about Jesse, if you really feel this way, then leave. Go do it, take another job. Or best yet, leave en masse and replicate Canada Land. Take his lunch, eat Jesse's lunch. Go do it. I'll cheer you on. You know, great new independent media. Do your thing. You don't like that. If you think your value is so invested in your skills, your collective skills, then prove it. Leave. Go become the owner of your own thing. Go captain your own ship. I'll be the first to cheer these guys on if they did that.
They'd be doing
But they don't actually have the balls to do that. And we all know they don't have the balls to do that. What they have the balls to do is
bless you, sign anonymous letters.
Sign anonymous letters, and then to expect us to cheer them on for it. I don't.
No, I think me and the listeners and the viewers got that. I read you loud and clear.
I don't necessarily want to. Yeah, Jesse's made his own bed. You're right. I think the only answer for him is he's got to leave,
or he's got
to clean house, or he's got to shut Canada Land down, give it 6 months, and then start Canadalandia or something like that.
Bless you.
Sorry, I just coughed there.
You're choking on your indignation.
No, it's some anyway. Yeah, I think that if he allows the status quo to operate as it is, all that's going to happen is that his staff are going to use the bully pulpit to demand ever greater moral and editorial concessions. And there's only one way that goes, and it goes to damaging the fundamental brand that he's built.
Which is in no one's interest.
Which isn't in no one's interest. And I think that they've also demonstrated with this letter that these are not people who can be appeased on this issue or can be reasoned with on this issue. So to me, if I'm in Jesse's position, there's no good answer here, but there's really only one answer, which means there's one very easy answer. Jesse can take that as he leaves it, or take it or leave it as he goes. But, I have a lot of empathy for him as a human being. I think that there, but for the grace of God, could go any of us. And I just don't think, I think he's fundamentally a very nice guy, and he wants to be good to his people and his staff. And I think that impulse will wind up eating him alive.
Like and subscribe. All kidding aside, Jen, I hope you don't mind me airing some of our own, not even dirty laundry, just laundry. Like, you and I have had business discussions about what we want the line to be.
Oh, totally.
And basically, my fundamental rule is that I would like it to be big. I would like it to be thriving. I would like it to be making a real difference in the world. You and I, our financial aspirations for our own income are generous, but not unreasonable. Like, we don't expect we'll be retiring to the country anytime soon. But one of the things I always say is that we keep this 100% an operation between you and me.
100%, and that's because we trust each other. We fundamentally trust each other.
And who the fuck needs that bullshit that Jesse's dealing with here? So
nobody. And also, it's not to say that I wouldn't want to expand our staff, and I hope that actually in reasonable years we can expand our staff. I would like the line to be able to do more than we're doing right now, and as we grow and as our income grows, I think we'll be able to do that.
I'd like to generously pay freelancers.
Yeah, fair enough. We could do that too. But the other thing too is I also think that anybody who we would bring on board, I would want to have a really clear understanding that we tolerate all kinds of opinions. We disagree with us, that's great. You don't want to take a different editorial line than us, absolutely fantastic. But we deal with that in a way that is collegial and professional and internal.
And then no one ever gets confused about whose party this is.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're a guest and we tell you to leave, you go.
Well, yeah. And to me, I don't think that's the only way that when you're dealing with contentious issues and you deal with a cultural industry that deals with contentious issues, that's the only way you can function. It's the only way to function. And, there's also another thing that I would say is, I will tease my husband and I will tease you, and, you guys all take it in good spirit, but you will never actually hear me trash my husband to anyone. Do you want to know why? Because it makes me look bad.
Yeah.
Because I'm the one who chose him. And I would say that a version of that exists in the employer-employee relationship. You have issues. We know that there are a lot of bad employers out there. There are a lot of shitty employers, and there need to be mechanisms for people to deal with those issues and deal with abuse and to deal with harassment and all these kinds of problems, deal with workplace problems. I'm not naive to that. I'm not like necessarily like pro guy in the top hat. All right. I do think there need to be mechanisms in place. But you aren't making yourselves look professional or good faith when this is how you approach your internal editorial disputes.
I think, yeah, and to that, Jen, I would add this. I have had, unfortunately, front row seats at when a front row seat, or even being outright on the stage or in the ring when newsrooms have gone weird. And something I think I grasped, and I don't mean to shit talk any colleagues here. I really don't intend to do that. I don't want to reopen old wounds, but one of the things I think I grasped intuitively that some of my colleagues didn't is that newsrooms, like any other functional entity, need to have a chain of command.
Absolutely.
And if that breaks down, it doesn't work. And what often happens, and I 100% understand this, and I'm as susceptible to it as anyone. When you like the people you work with, it can be really hard to pick one to put against the wall and shoot. But sometimes that's exactly what you got to do. And when managers, either because of the labor conditions or the contracts or their own personal squeamishness, are not willing to take someone they like and put them against the wall and metaphorically shoot them, things can fall apart. And for what it's worth, and I think you know this about me, I love you, Jen. I'd shoot you if I had to.
But Matt, the reason why we're actually partners in this
is because I'll never have to.
You'll never have to.
I know. Yeah. And I look, Jesse has to leave, or he's going to have to put a few people metaphorically against the wall, and it's up to him. It's up to him to decide whether or not he's up to doing either of those things.
I think just temperamentally, I don't think he's going to do it. And that just means that we're just going to see more and more drama coming out of Canada Land.
Which unfortunately will hurt him and everyone who works there. And
yeah, absolutely. And make the work environment shittier for everyone involved.
And this is what makes it awful for me to have been in that situation, watching people I really valued and liked and am still friends with today struggling to get to the point where they realized that people needed to be shot, because every day of delay just made things worse for everybody. A good swift execution at the outset would have been in everybody's best interest, because sometimes you need to remind the newsroom, just because we hang out in the lunchroom together doesn't mean I'm not the boss.
Unless you don't want to be the boss anymore. And if you don't want to be the boss anymore.
I didn't. That's why I left. Here I am.
Well, and if Jesse doesn't want to be the boss anymore, he can make that call. I just hope that he's making it on his own terms.
Like and subscribe.
I
guess we're down to the point, Jen. The only other item left on the list is that, and this is as much a programming note for the listeners as anything, this is our final podcast for 2013.
Oh my God.
If there's some spectacular, did I say 2013?
Yeah.
2023. I guess it is also our final podcast for 2023. Barring some spectacular news event that we cannot help but comment on, we plan on this being our final podcast, and we'll reboot it obviously in the new year. We'll be back. We're just taking a few weeks off. We will have a written dispatch this weekend. We will have a written dispatch on Friday of next week, which will mark the official start of our holidays. And in the first week of January, we're going to run what will now be our tradition for that time of year at the Line, which is a week of gratitude stories, where ourselves and some of our contributors will share things that they feel good about for the coming year ahead. We're often dour at the Line. We know that. We'd like to start a new year with our head in the right mental space. So we'll be doing that. But let me ask you a question, and then you can ask me the same one. So 2023.
I forget what happened there.
A lot of stuff. What are you going to remember from this year?
Israel. Everything before that's been a blank.
Does have that feeling, doesn't
it? Yeah. No, if you were to ask me about a news story,
you gotta come closer, Jen. We can't see or hear you.
The prime minister divorced. Polyev started to rise in the polls. my children aged.
You didn't though. You stayed the same.
Yeah, it's getting a little creepy in it. Got a couple chapters done on my book. I was in Toronto for our event. We had our event.
Mhm.
I don't remember what happened this year.
2023 was the year I turned 40.
Okay.
Which was obviously a milestone year, and it's a year that, especially when you're wired the way I am, leads to a lot of reflection and thinking about stuff, paths not taken, mistakes made, opportunities to get things right in the future. For the line, it was a great year.
Yeah, we did great at the line, and thanks to you guys, killing it.
And I think we can't reveal too much yet, but I think we got pretty big plans for next year. Which hopefully, if we pull them off, will be meaningful, significant.
Epic.
Okay, well, that's setting the bar high, but yeah, I think, kind of I think 2023, I think, was a grim year, and I just don't mean that as a guy who now has to worry about his prostate specific antigen and bullshit like that. I mean specifically, at the end of 2022. Ukraine had a great counteroffensive. Biden was sky high in the polls. We kind of felt like we were coming out of a dark chapter, and maybe the post-COVID normal would be better. And I think 2023 has been a year that is generally underwhelmed.
No, it's not going to get better.
Yeah. Or where in the case, as you've mentioned here, because not only do we have Israel, which you've mentioned, but...
Oh, right. We haven't even talked about how Trump's going to be president next year, have we?
No.
We should probably start talking about that.
I don't wanna.
Can we just do it after the holidays, please?
Yeah, like and subscribe. We'll do it after the holidays. We've got weird geopolitical maneuvering in Latin America, which is bullshit. We don't read right now. We've had the entire Persian Gulf region, through which the world depends on for energy, is a shooting gallery these days. Russia is reconstituting its military, I think, faster than the Ukrainians can destroy it. The Russians and their allies are outproducing us in critical munitions, which is depressing. I'm going to have a column about that early in the new year, gathering my notes on it. As dour as I can be, I am not by nature defeatist. In fact, I'm almost anti-defeatist. Doesn't matter how into how fine a paste you grind me, I will get back up just to flip you off. But this has been a tough year. I had hoped maybe there would be more to be optimistic about at the end of this year. Without commenting on whether or not it's good or bad, obviously a significant year politically in this country as well. Just a lot of big changes. The polls are a bit bumpy right now. We've had 3 federal polls out, one of which shows a big swing in the Liberals' favor, 2 of which don't. So I don't know how to read that. I think we're going to have to wait a couple of weeks and see what direction that goes in. But I think my main takeaway from 2023 in terms of Canadian politics is, oh my God, what a shitty array of options. When I look at the challenges that are arrayed against us and the people who are the most likely in different circumstances to be asked to do anything with them, I want to leave the country.
I come.
Yeah, you can come. Yeah,
all of our American listeners, if you see Matt and I blink 3 times, it means come get us.
I don't think the U.S. is where we should go.
Where should we go?
I don't know yet.
Working on it.
Working on it really hard.
Working on the lines, plan B. The line B.
Line B, line C, line D, line
be like
E.
the Enterprise. It's like the Enterprise naming conventions, right?
Yeah. At 1701 dash something. Line dash. I think one of the interesting stories that's been popping out, and this is funny, listeners may have noted, I look a little worse for wear this week. Viewers may have noticed this. I, being now in my 40s, I went through a battery of physical tests and medical tests just to make sure everything was fine. And one of the things that was flagged was that apparently sunscreen does matter. And I was delinquent about that as a youngster. And I had a series of minor skin issues, none of which were cancerous, but a series of which my dermatologist said, this is the sort of thing we don't want to ignore. And the choice was basically we monitor it regularly until it becomes a problem, or we just get rid of it. And I said, fuck it, get rid of it. Having gone through one healthcare system crashing pandemic again, I don't want to assume that in 5 years, when one of these things under my skin might have been becoming a problem, I don't want to assume the healthcare system is going to be in a shape to do anything about it. So if we can get rid of it now, let's just do that. So I got carved up real nice this week. And as I was, it's not fun. I had like 15 needles in my face, which is about as much fun as that sounds like. And also that really refreshing olfactory sensation of your own flesh burning as they cauterize it. And I'm like, I smell like my own barbecue. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm really glad I'm doing this. And I'm really glad I'm doing this because my faith in the Canadian healthcare system's ability to deal with me if I get cancer in the next 5 to 10 years is zero. And we've had a series of news stories out in recent weeks, and you would have seen them, of people.
On the plus side, your faith in getting access to MAID is 100%.
People dying in ERs, no doctors available to see them, people getting diagnoses and immediately electing for MAID because they know there's no reasonable prospect of medical care. My friend,
people getting their own local care passed off because they went to Bellingham for chemo and then were cut off from the local system.
My friend, my very dear friend Supriya Dwivedi has been very open in recent months about the death of her husband this summer from cancer, and I don't want to get too into the details of that. That's a personal story for her to tell, but she has told parts of it on air. When his situation was medically hopeless, it was almost impossible to get pain management for him.
Oh, good.
And I think the healthcare system's in a situation where I think most people will continue to receive adequate care, but I think what's going to happen is that the number of people who just get totally fucked by it, instead of being 1 out of every million, it might become 1 out of every 1,000, and then it might become 1 out of every 100, and then it might become 1 out of every 50.
Well, happy Christmas to you too, Matt.
Hey, it's you know what? Like I said before, you cannot grind me into a paste fine enough that I quit. What I do is I plan. I go, oh, okay. Well, this isn't working. What's plan B or C or D or E?
Noted. Well, maybe we'll talk about more about that in our gratitude essays.
My gratitude essay is going to be about Geddy Lee.
Okay. My gratitude essay is going to be about the readers of the line. Can
Sure.
I express can I do that? Can I express a really nice love hug in writing terms to the readers of the line? I say we put that in our final dispatch of the year. I want a Jen Gerson optimism and cheerful essay. Good. Okay. Well, I mean, I might need to get a little drunk and to write that off. Have you ever written a column completely drunk before? No, not totally drunk. Although I have done remember my dark Jen phase. I don't know. Drunk doesn't seem to make me happy, does it? No, I think I need some MDMA or something. I have never published a column I'd written drunk without first reviewing it sober. But drunk Matt can be hilarious when he's writing. A lot of typos, but trenchant wit. There you go. Okay, on that note, we really should shut this thing down. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe to the line.